Good evening and welcome to episode 5 of the Educated Black Female Perspective. My name is Dr. Marshall and I am super excited about this segment. So tonight I have a very special guest with me, Mr. Frederick Swoope Sr. Welcome, Mr. Swoope. How are you tonight?
I'm good, thank you, Doc, for having me here. I'm doing well. How about you?
Awesome. I'm doing well. First, I do want to apologize, everyone. There were some slight technical difficulties, but thank you, God. We were able to get them fixed. And so, for those who are tuning in now, thank you for joining us. And to those who will tune in later, I just want to say thank you in advance. And again, my name is Dr. Shawania Marshall, and I am the host. And I am also the founder of the Educated Black Female Perspective. I started this platform on last year after I finished my doctoral degree. My goal was to continue to create a platform that allowed people like myself and Mr. Swoope the opportunity to really talk about some of the injustices that are occurring in our communities, in our nation, and in our society. And my belief is that we have to continue to make people become more aware. We have to continue to inform people about what's going on, but also ensure that people understand that this is important. These issues are important. So many of the issues that we will be talking about tonight center around politics, they center around miseducation. They also center around, like I said earlier, injustices, racial disparities, and racism in America. And so that's why this platform exists. And so before I begin, I do want to share a little bit about our guest tonight because I am extremely honored and I am extremely proud to have him on my platform. Mr. Swoope, as I share with you, you are the first guy that I have had on my segment. And because of what you bring to the table, because of your experience, and just because of your personality and your character, I am truly excited about this segment. So before we begin, I do want to share with our audience just a synopsis about Mr. Frederick Swoope Sr. Mr. Swoope Sr. is a seasoned law enforcement and security professional with over 3 decades of distinguished services across multiple federal, state, and local agencies. A proud graduate of Bethune-Cookman University, whoop, whoop, HBCU.
Okay.
uh, Mr. Swoope began his career in public service as a police officer with the city of Fort Pierce, Florida. I'm sorry, in the city of Fort Pierce, Florida. He went on to serve as deputy and detective with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office in Tampa, Florida, where he gained extensive experience in criminal investigations. In 1996, Mr. Swoope joined the U.S. Department of Justice as a criminal investigator with the Drug Enforcement Administration, where he worked and served with the distinction for 20 years plus until his retirement in 2016. Wow, that's awesome. During his tenure with the DEA, Mr. Swoope Sr. was either directly investigating cases, some that involve the biggest drug cartels, including the Sonola, as well as the Black Mafia family. And these are some of the largest domestic drug trafficking organizations based out of Detroit, Michigan, and Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Swoope Sr. continued to lend his expertise as a law enforcement specialist with the Department of Homeland Security at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center from 2017 to 2019. From 2019 to 2020, he worked with the Department of Defense Contract Management Agency of the Inspector General. Since 2021, Mr. Swoope has brought his depth of experience to a federal contractor known as Protection Strategies Incorporated, contributing to the mission of national security and law enforcement support. Wow. That is a mouthful, Mr. Swoope, but you are definitely a wonderful guest that I am extremely proud to have on tonight. Wow, what an impeccable resume there. So I just want to say, first of all, I applaud everything that you've done, everything that you continue to do. And I've shared this with you, just being a person that's passionate about law and government and policy. I knew that I had to bring you on. So I just want to say thank you for saying yes. And I am super elated to have you on. So first of all, how are you doing tonight? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling just fine. I'm really excited about the opportunity that you're giving me to be a guest on your show. I mean, a person with such of your stature, your 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 ability to motivate and motivate people to want to be the best that they can, including me. You are a motivator. You're a very spiritual person that I admire that about you. I knew that when I first met you. Go Buffs. We're both Colorado Buffalo fans, and but more importantly, I knew that you were genuine. You were a spiritual person, and you were a kind person, and that is the reason why I agreed to come on your show. And I'm glad that you thought me worthy of being a part of your show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's funny that you said that. So, to our audience, I do have to share this. He did mention the Go Buffs. Funny story. The way we met, we were both flying out in December to go see the Colorado Buffaloes play in the Alamo Bowl. And so I'm in the airport by myself, and literally, you see tons of Colorado Buffs fans or Dion fans. And we literally just started talking. We were getting ready to get aboard the flight. And I don't know who started talking, but we just started talking about Colorado. So it's so funny, but I also share this with people out there because as you talked about what you noticed in me, I literally was thinking about as we were getting ready to go on, to me, it's divine intervention. Because from the moment that we started talking, it was so funny. We were talking about football, but then it was like, God has blessed me with the spirit of discernment. So when we started talking, it was like we had things in common. And when we connected, then we also ended up communicating throughout the time we were down in Texas while we were watching the game. And then we ended up flying out back to Atlanta together on the same flight. So we had quite a bit of time to talk. So in the midst of talking with Mr. Swoope, we talked about God, we talked about our careers, we talked about motivation. And I told him then, I said, I believe I would love to connect with you in the future. And fast forward, here we are. So, it's amazing how God works things out. And like I said, I do believe in divine intervention because it was something in you through your speaking, through your experience, through just how you live your life. And I truly believe in kindred spirits, like-mindedness. And so it was something then that I knew about you that I wanted to maintain that connection. So I am honored to have you on. So I wanted to share that with everyone, how he ended up on my show, how we ended up connecting. And I'm just grateful for this connection. I truly am. I believe in my heart, with so much that's going on in the world and how people operate. Character is big for me. Personality is big for me. And my circle is small. And anybody I let in my circle, we have to have some things in common. You got to be truly trying to treat people right and just have a heart, a heart for Christ. And so I can see that in you. So I do have to share that on the front end. So thank you. So we're going to dive into the meat of this because I've been excited all week, last week, and I am excited tonight. And we're going to start, I know you mentioned being from Tampa, Florida. So I want you to kind of share with the audience, being a Black man growing up in your youth, what was it like growing up in Tampa, Florida?
So actually, I grew up in Fort Pierce, Florida.
Okay, I'm sorry, but that is in Florida, right?
Yeah, that is. Yeah, they're on like East Coast, West Coast. But I did grow up in Florida. And it was like any other young Black male, you dream of, I know I did. I always dreamed of being something. I wanted to be a football player. I wanted to play for the University of Florida. That didn't happen. But I dreamed about that. I I wanted to be an architect. So just so happened Bethune Cookman didn't offer that curriculum, so that didn't happen. But growing up as a young black male in Florida, it was like any other kid, just curious about things. I grew up in the housing project. I had 10 siblings, and we were just trying to work our way through those days of so you just like now we had issues then, so you're talking about the 60s and the 70s where you still had riots, you had racial unrest, you had discrimination, and it was everywhere. It was in schools, it was in your workplace, it was just it was just there. And I remember my mom, who I think I got my spirit from. She was a fighter. She was one of the first black uh, female cashiers with the Winn-Dixie stores in my hometown because prior to that they were only offer part-time jobs to blacks. And one of the things they tried to use against her was that you needed a high school diploma, and so she got that, and so I was proud of that, and so it was like any other growing, up in any other town, southern town. You had your issues that you dealt with, and you tried to work your way through it.
Okay. Well, I know, like when you talked about your mom, my mom is my backbone. So, just hearing you talk about the influence that your mom had on you, that means a lot because my mom was a single parent. So, a lot of who I am stems from how my mom raised me. So, I definitely can relate there. So, thank you for sharing. So, my next question to you is I know you talked about already kind of having that within you. So, would you say part of your drive to want to be a law enforcement officer or just even going on to school stem from just basically how your mom brought you up, what she instilled in you as a child?
Yeah, it was a combination of my mom and my dad. So I don't want to misspeak here, but my mom was, my dad was a rather quiet man. My mom was, that person, and so I got a lot of my fight in me, desire. She was a big dreamer, and so she always told me, that you can be anything that you want. So she was that inspiration. My dad was just a hardworking man. Didn't say much, but he walked quietly, but with a big stick. People respected him. Uh, but as far as law enforcement is concerned, my dad had a lot of friends who were policemen. So they would come to the house, and I was a kid, and my mom would often tell me stories about how I would run up to these huge men that, and they lived in the neighborhood back then. They weren't allowed to police white communities, which is, I think helped out a lot as far as not having some of the issues that you have now with policing. You had people who lived in the community who were black, who were policemen, and they knew your families, they knew you, and they would come to the house, and my mom often talked about how I threatened to take their guns from them and that sort of thing. So I think that played a role in it, and my mom also went on to become a one of the first school crossing guards with the city of Fort Pierce Police Department. And so I was proud by that, but at the same time, I took a lot of jokes, on the school bus. Kids, like your mom thinks she's the real police. Look at her, she out here holding up traffic. That kind of stuff. So, but I was proud of her. I think it. So my wanting to become a law enforcement officer, I think began right there.
Okay. Okay. So it started when you were young. When you were
Yeah.
young kid. Okay. All right. So kind of transition on to the college years. Went on to Bethune-Cookman. I know you talked about they didn't have the particular program that you wanted to major in. So you talked about the inspiration to become a cop started with just people in the community. So my focus for tonight is living in America from the Black man's perspective. So beyond the college years, now you're in law enforcement. So talk to us a little bit about what, when you think about your experience being a police officer, what may have been one of your scariest moments when you were serving as a police officer, especially being a Black man in America? And I know you probably have more, but if you want to share one or two, feel free.
Probably the scariest moment was, uh, and it happened twice, uh, almost being shot by some of my white counterparts whom I work with, uh,
Oh,
while executing search warrants. And so it was one of those things where, all they saw, so they say, was a gun. But, you didn't see the vest that read police or sheriff, and that was scary. And to have those encounters, you would think that, your biggest fear would be to die at the hand of, you know, a bad guy, they say, or a suspect.
mm-hmm.
But, to almost lose your life to what they refer to as friendly fire, it's rather scary, and it was alarming. And it happens all the time. If truth to be told, it's unfortunate. That's why I was very careful in how I approach certain scenes. Not just with bad guys. It was the folks I work with, because folks, fear sets in, and if you can't control that fear, that generally leads to something bad happen.
That's, it's surprising that you say that because I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that that scary moment occurred where they felt as though something was going to happen or they almost lost their life to someone that's in their profession, like on the force with them. Like I can't even imagine that because when I think about back the blue, like you always hear people talking about how proud they are of supporting each other wearing that that uniform. So just knowing that that occurred, I can't even imagine what that was like. So, and I'm just curious, just hearing you say that, how were you able to bounce back, like from that moment where you talked about almost being shot by an officer? Like, how were you able to bounce back from that?
Well, after a few choice words with those individuals, uh, and I promise you that I would keep it clean. So, but we had some rather interesting conversations after those incidents, because I thought it shouldn't happen, just because you saw a gun, but you didn't see the whole person. You didn't see, you didn't see the sheriff in white
Mm-hmm.
across my chest. You didn't see the police illuminated across my chest.
Mm-hmm.
You almost took my life,
Mm-hmm.
and you think a simple apology is going to be suffice. Um, I would tell you that that was some pushing and shoving going on after those incidents.
Wow. Well, I am glad that you are here today to tell your story. So, it speaks to God just keeping you covered and definitely grateful for that. I know you shared in your bio just having the opportunity as a former a retired DEA agent working on some of the largest drug cartel cases. And if you can't speak to it, that's fine. But I was curious, and you don't have to single out one particular one, but What was that feeling like? Because, I think about just even when you mentioned the Black Mafia family, as a person just sitting watching TV, like I'm, I had no idea about BMF, and I'm watching that series and I'm like, wow, I had no idea that existed. But just, you could just kind of speak overall in general, like now that you sit back and reflect, or even at that moment when you
Well,
were directly involved or indirectly involved, like what was that feeling like?
so so you had so we dealt with so in the early 2000s things began to change as far as types of organizations that we were investigating. Most of the time, in the early years, 80s, 90s, it was mostly street level stuff, mid level stuff, mostly domestic, drugs. You're dealing with people locally. But then, as Pablo Escobar was killed, and the drug trade and trend and trafficking switched from Colombia to Mexico. So a lot of those, and so you have the city of Atlanta, which is a huge hub. Even before 9/11, you had the airport, Hartsfield Jackson Airport. You had you have 285, you have 85, you have Interstate 75, you have Interstate 20, which is just a hub, and it provides all sorts of entry points into Metro Atlanta. And what was happening was that these drug trafficking organizations, as far as the Mexican cartels, they realized that one, Atlanta has the biggest airport, has a lot of interstates, and they have a huge Hispanic population. So it was easy for them to fit in. So we dealt primarily with that for the most part during the early 2000s to to now. Um, Prior to that, you were dealing with mostly. I did a lot of undercover work. And I was dealing with a lot of black street black drug traffickers. BMF, I came across at the tail end of it. When I first arrived in Atlanta, I saw a big sign on the side of the interstate, and it said BMF. I thought it was like a rap group. I'm thinking this is a rap group not paying it any attention. And so when I get to work, I say, hey man, who's this group BMF?
Hmm.
He say, fool, that's not a group. That's a drug trafficking organization. They originally out of Detroit, Michigan. I said, oh,
Wow.
okay. So they were that bold. You know, they had the big sign. And so a partner of mine, a guy that I actually inherited the case after he retired, the tail end of it, when he worked that case, and you can look it up, it's pretty public now. The agent, whom everybody in that organization, attached to that organization, feared. Uh, and so I took on the tail end of it because it was so many different moving parts to that organization. It was one of the probably the biggest black drug trafficking organizations uh, during that era in the mid '90s to early 2000s. They were the biggest black drug trafficking organization, to my estimation, that in this country. They were smart. There was two brothers, and
Hmm.
they were smart, and they ran the organization like an organization. They treated people fairly for the most part, unlike most drug trafficking organizations. And so, and thus you have the movie now or the show BMF, and I think actually one of the actors is actually the son.
He is, and I learned that through my research because I saw it. Just wanted to learn a little bit more about after watching the series, and for me, it was like, wow. So that's how I found out the older son that what
Yeah,
plays the older son in the movie is actually the guy.
so,
Meech. I think what they call him Meech, Big Meech or Meech.
yes, yes.
It's actually that's his son. And I'm like, wow. So, even just hearing you talk about, your experience, I'm just it's an awe moment because you have so much experience from Homeland Security, from DEA, just every law enforcement. You bring so much to the table, and I wanted people to hear that because as we kind of move further along, we're going to talk about the dynamics of just Black men living in America and just being an educated to Black man, and just some of the experiences that you've gone through and just experience. So I want to kind of go on into like adult years, and as we kind of talk more about your career. So what do you think, as you've had your experience, you get to Atlanta, you worked on this major case. So how are you feeling being a Black man? Now you're in Atlanta, you moved from Florida. Like, what were your thoughts? So what was that transition like? Was it any different coming from Florida? Were people treating you differently? Or did you kind of see, like, when you think about the dynamics of racial injustice, systemic racism on the job, what was it like being a Black man?
So I actually, so I came here by way of New Orleans, Louisiana. So
Okay.
the job transferred me into Atlanta, and I was pretty excited to come to Atlanta. To know what people refer to as the Black Mecca. Um, I was impressed because, unlike in the state of Florida, you can't go in almost anywhere in Metro Atlanta and just see Black people. And I was truly intrigued by it. You have Black sheriffs, you have Black chiefs of police, you have Black district attorneys. All of these things are pressed. You have Black mayors of the various cities and counties, and so I was thoroughly impressed, and I still am. So when I go home to Florida, it's like a culture shock, because it's the complete opposite. So that was my experience, and those were my feelings when I initially arrived here. I had never, I'd never seen that many Black people in such high, high positions and powerful positions before. Until New Orleans had was kind of similar, but on a smaller scale. But Atlanta, I guess I was excited about Atlanta because this is where the civil rights movement was kind of born, and you had people like Andrew Young, you had Martin Luther King, John Lewis, and all these greats that came through here, and that's huge. They're hugely responsible, like Miriam, uh, like they were responsible for what we see now in Atlanta. Because I remember years ago when I came to Atlanta was still kind of country. It was, it, and it wasn't until after I think the uh, the Olympics in '96 that it kind of like blew up.
Okay. Okay. So let's kind of fast forward a little bit. So now I want to kind of talk about around, I think, believe it's 2020. COVID hits, being right mid 2019. Now we're in 2020, around the time when this tragic, very tragic occurrence happens with, a Black man in America. And so you're still, in your field as a police officer, and correct me if I'm wrong, at that time when George Floyd was killed, murdered, were you serving as a police officer then, or by that time you had transitioned over into well, you at that point you were no longer DA agent, but were you still a police officer around that time? What area were you serving in?
I was employed at that time with the Department of Defense,
Mhm.
uh, uh, Defense Contract Management Agency Office of Inspector General.
Okay.
So and so that when that hit, we were starting to tone things down as far as investigations, because if that job required me to, I would be in California today, and tomorrow I would be in Orlando, and the next week I would be up in Virginia somewhere. And so when COVID came about, things began to shut down. And so that's what I was doing at that time.
Okay. And so and I wanted to ask because by that time you served as a police officer plenty of years. I would like to know what were your immediate thoughts when you saw it hit the news, when you saw what went on? Because I know how I felt as a Black woman. What were your thoughts at that moment, just seeing that transpire and even, just seeing that long segment of this police officer, former police officer now, with his neck on this defenseless Black man? Like, what were your thoughts?
Honestly, I was pissed. I was angry. I was upset. Um, and I was emotional because I could see and to hear that young man calling for his mother, while this idiot has his knee on his neck and he's looking into the cameras of those who are recording this incident as if it's like it's just another day at the office. And it reminded me so much of the things that I had witnessed, I had to deal with while working in law enforcement, people who had no respect for the community, the Black community, people whom I felt that should never be on the job, but somehow they were. But his actions were just one of many. We often hear them say just one bad apple. Well, you have enough bad apples and you end up with a bushel. And to see that, it really angered me to the point where I just felt like there's got to be something done about this sort of thing. We just can't continue to write it off as one bad apple. To take the life of a human being and it to be seen as, well, you really don't know what happened. I'm like, what are you talking about? That's what really upset me. You had the media and you had folks in law enforcement talking about, well, you don't know what happened leading up to that, or you don't know what was really going on. And that is just so typical. Unfortunately, many of our leaders and men and women in law enforcement, it's not that they all bad, but they watch bad things happen and do nothing about it.
That part right there. Because when I think about the officers that stood by and not one tried to intervene to say, stop, this isn't right. And I know people said, well, they were, new, they were in training, but something within you, like, I just truly believe if you're raised and taught right from wrong, and that was a moment where you didn't have to sit there and think about it. You knew in that moment that wasn't right. And so I wanted to hear your perspective, especially being a former police officer, but also being a Black man, because like you said, sometimes people feel as though because I am a law enforcement officer, I have to support my fellow officer, but right is right and wrong is wrong. And so I remember watching that, and it was a moment of disbelief because I'd never in my life seen anything like that. I remember being and I was angry, I was upset. I remember participating in the protest that they had here in Atlanta. I was upset. I just felt like I had to do something, just to let people know, like, I have to make my voice heard because this behavior cannot be condoned. It is not acceptable. So I thank you for sharing that. And so I do want to ask you, because I think about, there are some young men, there are some people that are still going into the law enforcement profession. So I do want to ask you, just kind of talking about that situation, which was horrific. What advice would you give people who are wanting to be a police officer, whether male or female? Because you just never know. And I think about some of those officers who were new, and that was like the rationale for why they didn't say anything. So just what advice would you give people who are considering going into law enforcement, just some things that they need to be aware of and just you believe would be good advice for them?
Well, first of all, the fact that you're new doesn't mean that you're voiceless. The fact that you're new doesn't allow you to stand by and watch something as heinous as that occur, and you hide behind the fact that you're new. Because when you took that oath, you took an oath to the people, not to that officer. You took an oath to the people, saying that you would uphold the law, you will protect and serve all people. And to me, when you say that, to me, you're a coward, and you're looking for a cowardly way to get out of it. Um, I can't speak for every other officer, but throughout my career, I encountered a lot of flack and pushback and just because I spoke out against what I deemed to be wrong. There are times where when you're young, you're new, when it with regards to okay, well, you wasn't safe when you uh, pulled that car over. You didn't use the proper uh, uh, technique in placing that subject in the handcuffs or taking them into custody. Okay, when you're new, you listen to that. But when it comes to something that violates your policy, that's really breaking the law, and you see another individual that you worked with taking the life of a human being unnecessarily, and you stand by and watch, then you are just as guilty as the person who did it themselves because you stood by and watched the life. You're saying this person's and your reputation is more important than the life of the individual you just deserve seeing that you just deserve life being snuffed from. I think that's ridiculous. I think that we have to put an end to that, this blue wall and we take care of each other. Honestly, that don't apply to black officers for the most part. It don't apply to us. It apply to them. Because the moment you do something that they don't like, then now you are the target. You become the issue. You have, now all of a sudden you are the issue. You are the concern. You're the problem. You don't go along with, or you're not a team player. And this is what black officers encounter with that. And you have to decide, because it's a lot of pressure, but you have to decide who you are. And you have to put that over promotions or just to go along to get along. You have to decide what kind of person are you going to be. And then too, can you sleep at night knowing that you watch something like that take place? Or can you sleep at night when you watch an officer place a baggie somewhere, or wrongfully beat a subject that's handcuffed, and you say nothing, you do nothing, you don't address it, then you're just as guilty and just as bad as that person. So the one bad apple really amounts to a whole bushel of bad apples just because you didn't participate doesn't mean that you're not guilty because you did nothing to stop it.
And that's powerful because I think about when I go to bed every night, like I like to be at peace. And when you mention those type of officers, you're right. Like for someone to be able to go to bed at night and make decisions that are those type of decisions, whether it's like seeing someone make a bad choice where it impacted a suspect, or just even like you talked about, maybe taking a bag or something like that, and they won't miss it, or just for whatever reason that they're doing it. Like it goes back to really who you are. It speaks to the character of who you are as a person. So it's interesting that you said that most black men who are police officers don't think that way. And it's interesting that you said that. I stuck a pin in that because I saw this debate on this show Dr. Rashad Richey. I like to watch him. He talks about a lot. So, you know, he talks about a lot of controversial things and things that people in our community need to be aware of. And so he had two police officers on there. It was two black police. You did. So I'm watching. I watched a brief synopsis of it, and I see one that's just gung ho the current administration and everything that they've been doing, even really in support of, in a sense, of the tactics that happened, you know, against George Floyd. And then you have this other one just appalled, and he's like, "Are you kidding me?" So when I see this black officer that's almost kind of condoning some of what transpired, and I'm thinking, really? How can you justify some of this? Like, what was your mindset when you see someone that is of our ethnicity supporting some of the current administration's tactics, but also what kind of transpired back then with George Floyd? Like, what's your mindset when you see that, especially a black man saying that?
You know, when I heard that interview of that particular guy, I said, honestly, that nigga crazy. So you got to know who that guy is. You know, so he's one of these Trump supporters, and he thinks that what he's saying is going to bring him some sort of favor in the eyes of Trump or some of his co-workers who happen to support Trump. And that's who that guy is. I think he's out of Texas. But see, here's what happens, because you know I come across a few of those. I mean, now let's keep it real here. You know, not all black folks are black folks. I'm just being honest with you. On any job, but especially in law enforcement, you have people who believe that they have to be harder on you because I don't want them to think that I'm doing you a favor. You know, or you see people that, you know, like when you go to them looking for guidance, and they'll tell you, "Oh, what a great group of guys I have worked for me." I'm asking, how did you manage to get to where you are now in management? What does it take to get there? And they won't. They'll talk around you. They'll talk through you, but they never really answer the question. So you run into that kind of black man, black woman, you know, throughout law enforcement. Not, but for the most part, we do jail because most of the time it ain't but a handful of us. You know, unlike Metro Atlanta, once you get outside of Metro Atlanta, when you get to these small PDs and sheriff's offices, you may out of a 50-man police department, you'd be lucky if you have 5. You know, if you got 100-man police department, you may have 10, and one may be a supervisor, if that. So you get a lot of pressure. You get a lot of pushback for speaking out, but you gotta be bold. You gotta be brave. You gotta think about the person that's coming behind you. And if there's a younger officer there, what are they thinking when they watch you, the senior officer, stand by and watch something go down that they know to be wrong, and you do nothing about it? Or you yourself, as the senior officer, you are participating. You are encouraging this sort of action, and you have these young officers coming up and say, "Okay, this is what this is about," and this is why you have so many officers. You know, there's a saying in law enforcement that if you ain't getting no complaints, then you ain't doing your job. So think about that. What kind of mindset is that? If you don't have any complaints, you ain't doing your job.
You know, when you talked about just people who are going to come behind us and why it's so important basically to do the right thing. And that's just, you know, I think about how I live my life. And that's why as I've gotten older and I've become more comfortable speaking out. Now I've always spoken, but when it came down to speaking out about things like this, injustices, racial discrimination, systemic racism, intersectionality, all of those things that I know are impacting people in my community, I can't be passive. And so I often think about what Shirley Chisholm said, like, if you're going to wallow and complain, and she was like, you basically, if you're going to be on the sidelines wallowing and complaining, basically just don't say anything. And I'm not that person. Like, I can't be passive. Like, if I'm going to complain about something, you best believe I'm going to be taking some action and speaking out on it too. And so I think about, I'm 46, and whether it's my relatives, and not even just my relatives, I want to be able to say that when I can't speak anymore, when I can't take action anymore, that I did all that I could to make sure that I participated, or I involved myself, or I got engaged in making sure that I did all I could to make sure that the people who are coming after us had a better future. So that's really kind of taking us to the next part of our topic. So I want to kind of transition into like where we are right now in this current administration. But I do want to ask this question first. When I think about criminal justice reform, a lot of times what happens is people who are of the minority, Black people in particular, when they go before the justice system the first time, literally they don't get that opportunity to which, I'm sorry, in which they may get a second chance. Like, you see more people of the majority, if they go before the justice system the first time, they easily get off. Like, there's no book thrown at them. So my concern is when it's a minor offense, especially for people who look like us, getting the book thrown at them, or ending up having to serve jail time or prison time for minor offenses. What is one thing that you think could be done to improve in really right now as it relates to criminal justice reform, making sure that this doesn't continue to happen? Because statistically it does, and we can see that by the prison stats. I mean, many of the prisons are overpopulated with Black people. So what do you think from the criminal justice reform side could be done to ensure that when Black people go before the justice system for the first time, that especially for minor offenses, they're not having, just basically the book thrown at them, or having to, basically, serve more time than other people?
Well, the problem with the criminal justice system is this. So, that you spoke to earlier, so chances are most Black offenders are going to receive, on average, 19% longer sentences than their white counterparts, right? Black women are more likely than white women to be incarcerated and often face longer prison sentences, especially if it's involving drugs. So then you throw in bail. So a lot of times people sit in jail before even going to court, before even being indicted, because they can't afford bail. And so this is a problem. Most people. So when you start talking about those factors, you show up and now they stack the charges against you, right? So you show up and you either take a plea, because even when you're innocent, because they stack the deck against you, they charge you with crimes that most DAs know that they can't prove all those charges in court, but they're hoping that they instill enough fear in you that you will accept a plea to a lesser offense. The problem with that, you just admitted guilt for a crime that you probably didn't commit, but out of fear of going to jail, because they tell you, and this is the thing we got to talk about, as our Black leaders, our DAs, we got to be on our public defenders, because they have a difficult job, and they have a large, they have a huge caseload. So if they can get you to plead to something lesser, because they're saying that if you complete your probationary period, that this charge will go away, whatever the case. But that record never goes away unless it's expunged. And that's one of the hardest things you can get done, is have your record expunged. So when you take a plea, when you sit in jail because you can't post bond, so when you show up in front of the judge, more than likely it's not going to be a judge that looks like me or you. And they're going to say, well, why come this guy sat in jail all this time? It's not, he said, well, and there's no one standing there with him. There's no bishop, pastor, whomever you want to call them. You know, they're not standing there, unlike our white counterparts. They got the whole community standing there. Oh, Johnny is a good kid. And Johnny excuse me. Johnny just robbed the neighbor for the second time and gets probation reinstalled to, he gets probation again. Me, on the other hand, I'm a first time offender. I have no one that's standing there with me, no one who looks like me. The judge doesn't look like me, and the judge is thinking he must have done something wrong. And then I'm gonna make sure, especially if they think it's burglary or if it's some sort of assault, they're gonna make sure you're gonna do some time and give you some, to give you enough time to think about what you just did, because they want to make sure you don't end up in their community. And so that's the unfortunate thing, is that we have public defenders who will get you to plead to a charge that you probably were completely innocent of. You know, some of these traffic stops these officers conduct, these so-called Terry stops, that when they pat you down and they find a small bag of marijuana, that doesn't feel like a weapon. A small bag of marijuana, you know, and so you're allowed to pat someone down, but the law says that if you feel something that you believe to be a weapon, knife, gun, you can then go into that person's pocket and remove it for your safety. A small bag of marijuana does not feel like a gun or knife, and this is what a lot of young men and women were going to jail.
It's interesting that you said that. When I was thinking about what I wanted to do my dissertation on, I was in between two topics, and one focused on centered around like prison reform, because I'm from Alabama. And so I had narrowed it down to two topics, and I was really looking at how the prisons in Alabama were so overpopulated. And so that bothered me. That was an issue for me, and it still is an issue, but I had to narrow it down between that, or if I wanted to focus on the basically the injustices that Black females face as they sought leadership. And so I ended up going with basically the lived experiences, the injustices that Black women face as they sought leadership in education. But I always said, once I got past the PhD phase, that I wanted to come back to looking at, you know, the prison systems. And I really wanted to focus on Alabama first, because I'm from Alabama. And when I see how overpopulated those prisons are, and even what you talked about, how some people can't afford their, you know, to pay a bond, or just, you know, how they're so easily, not necessarily easily, but they end up basically getting in prison before the majority, like that is an issue for me. So that's something that I do eventually want to come back and kind of like research and just kind of really look at, you know, more things that center around prison reform or criminal justice reform, because that's something I am passionate about. So thank you for sharing your insight there. So we're going to transition now into some more aspects of politics. So we are now past the first 90 days, and you and I both often share our input on some of the things that continue to occur, some of the craziness, chaotic things that continue to occur. So I do want to ask, like, just in a brief synopsis, what is your opinion about the first 90 days of this current administration's, it seems like a clown show, but what's your, give me your sentiments.
All kidding aside, it's really sickening to watch. As a former federal law enforcement officer and a local police officer, to see people like this administration, like Donald Trump. Here's a guy who's a convicted felon, and he's out here. He's just destroying everything that he feels is responsible for his own undoing. This is what this is about. This is a spoiled white man that's saying, "How dare you treat me this way?" And that's what it amounts to. And so now he's upset, and he's like a spoiled kid. He wants to take his ball and go home with it, but he ain't going home. He's standing over the bridge throwing stuff down at you, trying to
It's,
hurt you.
it's interesting you said that because I never thought about that. Like the analogy that you made, it's like I knew, of course, in my mind, I'm thinking, number one, he shouldn't even be president because he's a convicted felon. But what you mentioned about the fact that everything that he basically was, that he is guilty of,
Yeah.
34, felonies. And it's like now he's like a kid. And what you just said, it's almost like I'm going to attack you because you came at me. And that's literally what is going on. And I feel as though even like now, more recently, I don't know if you saw where it's almost like the judges, like their hands are tied on some of these decisions. I'm like, I never thought I would see the day where where the president of the United States would start almost calling the shots on the decisions that judges are supposed to make. Like they are judges. And so when you have the person that's serving in the executive branch almost pulling strings, calling the shots, it's very troublesome. It's very bothersome. Go ahead. You're about to say something.
So what we have to do, see it for what it is. So what we have is you have white folks who I'm just giving it a real, who sit back and watch someone who looks like them. They say, well, he's not so bad. He's just venting, right? So they are willing to allow him, when you give him an inch and he takes a yard. And they keep coming back, all right, don't do it again now. You're going to force me. And I know, first of all, this guy that sits in the White House he received 34 indictments against him and was convicted of every last one of them. He couldn't get on the facility that I work on right now, being a convicted felon.
Mm-hmm.
But yet he sits in the White House and he's making all these decisions that he's affecting people's livelihood when it comes to Medicaid, Medicare. They're going after Social Security. They're going after institutions. And this guy and people, what amazes me, and when I sit back and I see people sit back and say, well, he's making America great again. Well, when was America ever great as far as black people are concerned?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And everything he's doing is he's been allowed. He's being it's like white America is thinking he's doing that to them, not us. And that's why he's getting away with the stuff he's doing. They think it's only us.
It honestly, it is sickening. Like literally when I had my spring break, I disconnected from social media. I disconnected from CNN because I tend to watch it every day. I just disconnected because I said I need a break. And as soon as spring break was over and I got back into the news, I'm seeing other things that transpired within 7 days of me just being off. And it is sickening because, and this is where this is why I try to continue to educate and to inform people, because the reality is these issues, a lot of these executive orders, these decisions that this leader is making, they are impacting our community. And I know some people may say that's not my fight, and that's fine. But, as I shared earlier, it is my fight. And it is truly appalling to me. And so for me, when I see things that are impacting me, my community, my brothers, my sisters, and don't get me wrong, like I'm an advocate for all people, but I'm truly an advocate and passionate about things that truly impact our community. And you're right, our institutions of higher learning, we're talking about K through 12. We're talking about, when you think about dismantling the Department of Education, like all of these issues, I think people are missing. And that's why I try to share with people, when we talk about the Department of Education, it's not just higher ed, some of the services that some of your family members, some of your children may be receiving as it relates to whether it's, 504, special needs services. Like all of these things are funded through like federal funds. So if you don't think that these dismantling the Department of Education federal funds, saying to institutions that have DEI policies, if you continue to implement them, you won't receive federal funds. If you don't think this is your fight, you're wrong. And go ahead.
So think about this. So student loans, right? So he's turned the student loan department over to the small business, right? And while he's slowly dismantling the small business association. So who's going to manage those student loans now that you owe, that people still owe?
Right.
And just think about everything that he's done. And when I heard young black men and women when Kamala Harris was running for president, talking about law enforcement, they were saying, well, she locked up black men. I'm saying, well, she was the prosecutor, and her job was to prosecute those who committed crimes. It wasn't because they were black; it was because they committed a crime. Now, they don't talk about the fact that when she was the attorney general for the state of California and some of the programs she implemented to not only redirect young men and women who were probably on that school to prison train, pipeline. She developed programs for that, and she also developed programs to have those records expunged for nonviolent offenders. And so social media has its good points and bad points. I think it's great because, black folks can get, right now news. Unlike back in the day, we didn't watch the news. Our mothers and fathers watched the news. So the problem is you start listening to these conspiracy theories on social media. And when I heard black men and women talking about, well, she locked up black people, I'm saying, well, who in the hell you think locking black people up in Atlanta? Black prosecutors, black judges. But you ain't upset at them, but you upset at Kamala Harris because her job as a prosecutor, my job as a police officer. So the question I would ask you, so if somebody broke into your home and took all your stuff, and you found out that was a black person who did it, are you going to go to the district attorney and say, please, Mr. or Mrs. District Attorney, don't lock them up because they're black? You're going to be saying, lock that Negro up.
Right.
Am I wrong?
You are telling the truth. Justice should be served.
They're the ones that call the police. When you allow the police in your house, I'm just keeping honest. When you allow us in your house, when you call us, you better make sure you want us there, because when you call us, you may be inviting the devil into your house. How do you end up going to jail and you the one that called the police? Think about that.
I wanted to reiterate when you said about VP Harris. You're right. When people are making comments about what she did when she was a prosecutor, my whole thing was to let me do my research. So I did some research and I was like, oh, okay, well, of course, that's the role of the prosecutor, to prosecute. But I think people miss the fact that, like you talked about, those minor offenses, like making sure that there was something in place to make sure those records could be expunged, so they would have another opportunity to be able to have a chance in society to be able to kind of start back over in a sense. So people miss that part. And so since you mentioned that too, it was around about 70% of black men that voted for VP Harris. So there was 30% that didn't. And so what would you say to our black men, our black brothers? Because now my thing is, and this is to all people, I don't want to hear you complain now because it's done. You voted. But if you could say something to our black brothers, the 30% that didn't vote for her, what would you say to them?
First of all, I say stop smoking weed because you got to be that's making you stupid. For you to vote for someone that has no interest in you whatsoever, and he showed you that in his first term in office, and you decided that either you were going to vote for him as an alternative or you wasn't going to vote at all. And when you didn't vote, you really voted for him because it gave him pretty much a landslide as far as black people were concerned. I can't understand how you could sit there and say, well, because she locked up somebody, she locked up black men, and most of the time she locked them up for weed. Well, here's the thing, and let's keep it honest.
Mm-hmm.
If smoking weed in the public, you ride around and you got your window rolled down and you smoking a joint, and there's a good chance you're gonna come across the police. Whose fault is that?
It's your own fault.
It's your own fault. Mm-hmm. We got to stop the madness in our community. It was just a small crime. Mm-hmm. It was just a small bag of weed. Well, it might have been a small bag of weed, but you knew it was illegal. That's why you're always trying to hide when you see the police, right? So
exactly.
So why do it and then you blame everybody else? You're gonna blame Kamala Harris for that small bag of weed in your pocket.
And too, I have to add, I do believe too, being a black woman running for, given the fact that she was a black woman running for president of the United States, I do believe that some people that didn't vote, some of our black brothers that didn't vote, found it hard, are the ones that voted for the opposite. They found it hard to vote for a woman. And it was already hard enough knowing that the majority, other people, were not going to vote for her because she was black and she was a woman. But to see people who looked like us that just could not see a woman president, that for me was truly heartbreaking and heart-wrenching. And so unfortunately, now we're having to endure right now these 4 years unfolding right before our eyes, where we're living in a state of travesty and we're just trying to get through. So, one of the things that we've talked about too, even on Facebook, with the whole issue with DEI. And, I'm passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, one of the things that the leader of our country did was issue this executive order. Basically, any organization, institution that receive federal funds cannot continue to implement these policies, DEI policies. So how do you feel about that? Because I know for me, it's an insult, because what you're saying is, to me, for you to be bold to create this type of executive order and then for people to support it, what it says to me is that you are an advocate, or you are supporting, to me, racism. That's just, I can't see it any other way. You are truly saying that you don't see people in a way in which they deserve fair treatment. They deserve to have the opportunity to receive fairness, because they don't matter. So in your opinion, what is your opinion about the executive order that was issued? Like, people, organizations can no longer move forward with DEI policies.
Well, so he was just telling you who he is. They use DEI as, the scapegoat without actually saying, you Negroes gonna pay the price. And because that's what they're saying, but they're not saying it directly. They're saying it indirectly. So we're gonna take away your education initiatives. We're gonna affect you economically wise. We're going to affect you cultural wise when we start to shut down some of your black institutions. When we don't allow or don't recognize some of our black heroes, like Jackie Robinson. Mm-hmm. So what's that telling you?
It's an insult. You're right, because even with the National Museum in DC, you know, and we've had the banning of books now for years, but when you start attacking, like, to me, I experienced the first 4 years, but this is worse. And so when you're trying to remove our history so that children now can go see, can read, can have the experience, the exposure, like that is a tough pill to swallow. And it is truly an insult. And I know people say we have to keep teaching our own, and we do, but we still have to advocate and we still have to stand up for the fact that what people are doing, trying to remove our institutions that are our museums, that are our Black history. Because even, there was a point where at the beginning they were like, you can't, Juneteenth won't be celebrated. And, it was this whole thing about, Black History Month will not be acknowledged. What you're basically saying to me is that Black people don't matter. Like that's what you're truly saying. And that is a hard pill to swallow. And so when I talk about it, when I speak about it, it's because I want people to realize this is important. We are in the year 2025. And all of these executive orders, all of these decisions that are being made right now that impact us as Black people, it's basically what this administration is saying is we are going to take you back. And it's a hard pill to swallow for me.
Well, think about this, Dr. Marshall, is that so in 1984, 85, as a young policeman in my hometown, I was dispatched on a call, and it was at a local bar. And when I got there, one of the patrons was standing outside. I could see as I pulled up to the establishment that he was beaten pretty bad. He was rather bloody. And so I, proceeded to get out of my patrol car, and literally I'm going to offer some first aid before I, find out exactly what happened. So I wanted to make sure that he was okay. And do you know that I approached this guy, and he says to me, now he looked like he's beating somebody's fist with his face, and I'm sitting there. He says, I told them to send me a police officer and not no nigger.
Wow.
So imagine that I'm coming. So after I give him first aid, I got to go arrest the person who did this to him, who's probably been drinking. Is in one of those local establishments where, what we call cowboys, generally freaking, and it gets really crazy in there, right? As a matter of fact, the place was called Frankie's and Johnny's. And think about it. So now I'm gonna have to go in there and drag this guy out and take him to jail. And I know it's gonna probably be a good fight. But this dude that just called me a nigga. So imagine that. That was 1984, 85. Fast forward, here we are, 2025. They don't outright call us niggas no more, but they're letting us know you're still a nigga.
And and that for me is why I am so passionate about making sure that as best as I can, that anytime something occurs, whether it's a new executive order, whether it's an update in policy, if there's something that's happening that people need to be aware of, I have to share it. If we don't speak out, and like I said earlier, this is why this platform exists, because we have to ensure that we are doing our due diligence to educate our community. And that's actually going to really kind of take me to one of the questions that I wanted to talk about with you. One of the things that I feel like ruined this past election was misinformation. People chose to get a lot of their information from some of these social media platforms, from people who were some celebrities that had no knowledge about what they were talking about. I mean, just things that were unreliable. And so for me, I believe it is important to make sure that people are staying informed, but also informing them. Because like you said, everybody doesn't watch the news. And you don't have to necessarily watch the news, but for me, it's like, that's something that I feel like I have to do to stay abreast of what's going on. But of course, you still have to kind of do your research just to make sure, okay, is this true? What's the root of what's really going on? And so because, a lot of people don't watch the news, I feel like it's so important, and I have to do my due diligence being who I am because I am passionate about what's going on. You know, I'm passionate about the law, about policy, about government. And I feel like this is my way of giving back to my community, but also helping to support my community because I believe that it's important to stay informed. Because if you're getting all of this information from people that you see that are celebrities that don't even really know what they're talking about sometimes, or people that are just randomly posting, and there were some people that, you know, and I'll just be honest, people that were in my circle, some that were not in my circle, that were posting things as we were going into the election. And I'll be honest, I don't entertain demonic spirits. I don't entertain people who are not like-minded. So I will disconnect, because I feel as though you have to be mindful of what you're feeding yourself and what you're feeding your spirit and what you're sharing with other people. And sometimes people will take your post, and because it's something that you posted and they know you, they're going to say, oh, okay, I can believe it because they said it. And so I was bothered by some of the things that I saw people post as we approached the election. And in my mind, I'm thinking, why would you say that? Why would you post that when there's no truth in it? And then some of it was so insane. I'm thinking some people are going to believe that, and that will either deter them for voting for the right person or sway them to vote for someone that's incompetent. And I do believe that a lot of that misinformation is what played into the outcome of the election. And so I feel like and that's why, like, you will post things on your social media platforms. I'll chime and I'll read, you know, and I like that because I feel as though somebody has to do it. And so all of us have our callings, you know, all of us have things that we're passionate about. And for me, I feel as though this is just part of my calling. And I feel like if I can share something, if I can give information that's going to be essential to helping someone better understand how it can make their life better. It's almost like when we were growing up, I remember the old people used to say, if I can help someone along the way, then my living has not been in vain. And so for me, sharing knowledge, sharing information that's impactful and truthful, then I feel like part of my living is not being in vain because I am helping someone. So I wanted to really kind of add that to your point. And so go ahead.
So that's important because you know a lot of times you have a lot of misinformation out there, and so I look back at when was Bill Clinton was running for office, right? And everybody labeled him the first black president, right? Now, not knowing that Bill Clinton and Joe Biden and a few others were hugely responsible for the stiffer sentences and penalties federal penalties that were applied to drug trafficking, sending people to federal prison for 5 grams of crack cocaine, the equivalent of a few bags of sweet loaf. So you imagine that. So if you had these few grams of crack cocaine and you add a gun in there, you are now facing, instead of 5 years, 10 years in federal prison. In federal prison, you're going to do 85% of the time. There's no good time. It's 85. So if you got 10 years, you're going to do 8.5 years. And so just think about that. Then we get fast forward. Thank God for President Barack Obama, because he did try to minimize or increase the amount that it would take and require for people to be sent to federal prison for those amounts of small amounts of crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. So 5 grams of crack cocaine will get you anywhere from 5 to 10 years in federal prison. And you turn around and got 5 grams of coke, and that's going to get you probation in local or state jail, if that. Mm-hmm. So just think about the disparity in that. But we lauded people like Bill Clinton and Joe Biden. You know, Joe Biden he tried to redeem himself. He was partly responsible for dismissing the testimony of Anita Hill. And people forget that. That's how this idiot, Clarence Thomas, ends up on the Supreme Court justice.
Okay. I remember that case coming about, but I think I was around maybe my teenage years, but I do
Yeah,
remember, I don't remember the fact that he was involved in that. And that's interesting that you said
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Okay.
They undermined Anita Hill's testimony just to get that Negro on the Supreme Court justice. And there was a lot of black folks that say, why is she going after a black man? Well, apparently she knew something because if we had a listen, we wouldn't have to deal with that idiot right now.
And I will say, because I was young back then and I really didn't know, just from what I remember, that was my first thought. Like, why is she going after him? But now that I'm older and wiser, and I see now, and I actually kind of did my own research going back to go back to kind of look at that case, but also I've done some research about him over the years, and everything that I've seen lately over the years, the decisions that him and his wife have been tied to, and some of the things that they have done. I'm like, this man is, he literally is just a Supreme Court justice making decisions that are going to support the right. And
He's
it's just,
trying to get rich. That's what he's doing.
it's so
That's
unfortunate.
that his goal is to become rich. And he wants to be like his rich white friends. That's
I
what
can
that's
believe it. It's unfortunate. Well, as we kind of wrap up, I have a few more questions that I want to ask because I definitely think they're going to be essential, and I think they're going to be, really important to share with our audience. I want to talk a little bit about fatherhood. I know you told me you have two sons, so tell us what it has been like raising two sons, being Black in America.
well, like any other black father, you always, have that talk. And I was in law enforcement, and I still had to have that talk with my sons because I knew what could happen at any given moment they left home, whether they were going out with their friends or they were, driving to the store or going to a high school game. I had to have that talk, and I was concerned. I wasn't concerned with all the talk we talk about black on black crime. That wasn't my concern. My concern was my son's getting stopped by some crazy road police officer. That was and he ended up either severely beaten or lose his life because of just asking a question. So it was tough, because you always worried. I raised two good sons. Now, that they have their, they look at you because you're now dad police. Even some of my nieces and nephews, they call me Uncle Police, right? And you have to kind of separate yourself from that and be a father and let them know that it's all about love. I'm concerned about you. The things that I'm telling you, the things that we're having conversations about, it's all out of concern for your well-being. I'm not being hard on you just for the sake of being hard on you. I'm truly concerned. I'm not concerned about your friends. Some of them, yeah, but my sons were a pretty good judge of characters when it came to that. So I trust them when it came to that. Besides, if you came to my house, it wasn't no way was up. It was, hey, how you doing, Mr. Swope? Good evening, Mr. Swope. So I didn't play that. And they knew that. They would tell their kids that. I mean, tell their friends that. But it was no different than any other black father. It's unfortunate that we got to have that talk with our sons, with our daughters. Why is that? Why do we have to have that talk? But we do, and it ain't always about the neighborhood. It's right now it's about that other element, and we got to speak truth to power.
Yes.
You got other police officers; they're afraid to call out other police officers, and this is how this mess continues. And they make excuses, or you really didn't see what you saw. And then when unfortunately, like George Floyd, now you want to bring up his past. What's that got to do with what just took place?
Exactly.
They always trying to demonize the victim instead of the person responsible, the police officer.
Yeah, that's one of the hardest things for me watching the news. Sometimes the incidents that happen is when they try to demonize the victim, and to me is so insulting. So you talked about, having to have those talks with your sons. So I do have to ask, what would you say has been one of the toughest talks or conversations that you've had to have with your son or sons as a father?
Making babies. Uh,
Sorry. Speak truth to power. Sorry.
you know, there was that saying, any fool can have a baby, but it takes a man to raise a kid.
Amen.
So I was telling him, I'm a granddad. I'm a proud grandfather, but those your kids. You raised those kids because I raised you. And we got to speak truth to power. It's those conversations, having those conversations with them, it's tough because they're looking at you like you're crazy, right? But they were tough, but I felt they were needed. You got to have those conversations, and fathers, we got to stop when our sons. This is where the problem lies when it comes to that. So if you got a son, you telling him, hey, he's 5 years old. You're saying, hey, you got a girlfriend yet?
Mm.
Now your daughter, you ain't asking her does she have a boyfriend yet, right? So that's where that mindset comes from. Little boy, he's thinking now he's got to have a girlfriend or two because that's what his daddies, uncles, everybody's asking him. But you ain't asking your daughter that. As a matter of fact, excuse me, you're taking IDs. Any joke come to you and say, man, who your people are? Let me see your ID. Now. Let me make sure you ain't one. You know, so think about that mindset, and so I personally believe that's what happens to us as men, you know, and as little boys, we get sent mixed messages of what a man is versus a little girl should act like a lady, be a woman, right?
Mm.
But they're asking this little boy, you ain't got no girlfriend yet? My I could share this quick story with you. My dad, I went to pick my son up from my dad's house, and my son was about 3 or 4 years old at the time, my youngest son. And my dad said, "Hey man, I need to talk with you." I said, "What's up, Dad?" He said, "So you know the girl next door that lived next door to my mom?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Donna." I said, "Yeah." So I saw Donna come out the house, and little Fred was looking at Donna, right? And he said, and my dad said, ask him, "So you like her?" I'm like, well, are you asking this little boy, do you like her? But Fred said, yeah, right? And then my dad said, well, go tell her. And Fred said, I can't. My dad said, why? Because I ain't got no money. And he looked at me, did he get that from you? I'm like, no. But that's what happens with little boys. They're being told that they gotta have girls and they gotta have in order to have girls, they gotta have money. So
Mm.
you have little boys. So I say that to say this. It's tough being a black male because you're catching it everywhere. And I'm gonna have to speak to the sisters too. So
Mhm.
since we're talking. So I mean, because it goes both ways.
Right.
So stop telling that little boy, stop calling him your man. He's a little boy. Don't call him your man because if he start thinking that he's your man, he's
Mm.
gonna start challenging you and any friends that you invite over
Mhm.
because he thinks he's that man now. You told him that he's that man. Let him grow up and be a little boy.
Mm.
Stop. I'm just keeping it 100. Now it get catching. You're my man. Or stop telling him you just like your daddy.
Well, I like the transparency because I was raised. My mom didn't play that, so you're right.
Mhm.
There was not going to be any conversations about any boys, especially until I was like in high school. And that was probably my sophomore and junior year. And I was one of those kids, like, because, and I love my mom, but she was firm. She didn't play. And I was not having any of those conversations with her. So it's funny that you say that because, we look back now, we talk, I'm like, my mom, she was just no nonsense. And so there were just some things that like you talked about, it's kind of acceptable now to say. It's, but it's technically not. So it really goes back to like parenting, how you choose to raise your children. So I applaud that, and congratulations on raising 2 sons, especially in the world that we live in, 2 great sons. So thank you for sharing that experience. Yeah. And so I know both of us are Greek, so I did want to ask this question. Being a member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity and me being a member of Zeta Phi Beta sorority, one of the things, yes. So one of the things that, even after this happened around Bloody Sunday, there was this picture I saw on the internet where Divine Nine came together in Selma crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. My heart was truly warm. Just seeing the Divine Nine come together in unity, in recognition of, I think this was the 60th anniversary. But even when I think about right now with what's going on in America, we see and we hear more of the Divine Nine coming together, meeting, trying to do things together in unity, to try to educate, to inform, to try to drive, our nation forward in a positive way. So I want to ask you, because you are a member of D9, what would you say that Greeks should do more of, or could potentially get more involved in, to help bring more positivity, really just in outreach, whether it's relating to what's going on in our nation or just supporting our communities? Is there anything that kind of comes to mind?
Honestly, I think they do quite a bit, but I think that with regard to our communities, that we need to, like we did recently at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, we need to work together. Divided we stand.
United
we stand, divided we fall. So if we don't work together, and pressure our politicians, especially our Black politicians who they feel like they have a right of passage. They come to us, they come to our churches and, shake hands and wave and have a barbecue and sell some fish and all that stuff. But I'm saying we need to hold our community leaders accountable. And when we put pressure as one organization as opposed to 9, it sends a message. You can no longer depend on us just to write you a check. That comes a responsibility with that check now, because there lies the problem. We do a lot of other things as far as mentoring kids and stuff like that. I think our kids are fine. It's our community as a whole that I think that we need to come together on and take more responsibility with who's being elected as mayor, who's been elected as the DA, who's been elected as the next congressman or senator. We got to take more responsibility. It's one thing for us to stand individually and take photo shots and selfies, but when we stand and we demand, it's one thing to stand, but you must demand that, hey, we're going to hold you accountable. If you want our support, we're going to hold you accountable. And if you're not accountable, then we're going to make sure that we remove you. And we got to stop, being happy because we got somebody Black. I want to have someone Black, but I want to have somebody that's Black and proud.
Amen. Amen. And that's why, just hearing you say that, for me, I am so I don't want to see you sharing a picture, but there's no action. And so I totally agree with you. Photo ops, that's something like, and I see that a lot, because what I tend to look at is, okay, what are you doing behind the scenes? And so for me, when I think about, and I'll just use my pastor as an example, Dr. Jamal Bryant, that's one of the reasons that drew me to joining my church, because he goes outside of the four walls. He's a member of Kappa Alpha Psi. He understands, and this is what I really love about what he does at our church and in the community. He educates us, but he also ensures that we understand what's going on. And sometimes I know people kind of get caught up in the fact of saying, well, it's about the word. Yes, it's about the word, but it's also educating your community on what's going on in the community and across the world so that they can better themselves. And he's really big on advocating and standing up for what is right. And he speaks out on things that are not right. And this is one thing that I will always believe in. You have to go beyond the four walls. You have to make sure people understand what's impacting them, because a lot of times, like we talked about earlier, everybody doesn't watch the news. Everybody doesn't get involved in politics. But this is what I saw this post, and I just want to add this. Somebody said that you may not like politics, but politics impact all of us. Policy impact all of us. And it's the truth. And so I say that to say, when I think about what Dr. Bryant does, I love it. I applaud it. And it's not, when I think about what I'm passionate about, it's so in line with that. And so, yes, I love my sorority, and I'm also on the Get Engaged committee. And I chose being on that committee because I'm all about getting engaged. But people that know me and people in my organization know me, like, no, I'm not just going to take a picture. You can best believe there's some action behind what I'm doing. And like you said, when people are running for office and positions, like, it's important to ensure that I don't care if you're part of D9. And honestly, I would love to see us in these positions, but ultimately it goes back to, what are you really doing? What have you been doing? What is your end goal? Are you really trying to help the people? And so when we talk about Greek unity, like for me, I will say, when I was younger in college, coming out of college, of course it was all about Zeta. I love my sorority, but as I got older, and even now, I love what we do in unity. I love when we do things together. And to me, that is so important. And I'm, that right there speaks volumes. And I know we love our own, but there is nothing like coming together in unity, standing together, advocating for things, and just helping and serving. And people see that we're not just caught up in our own organizations, because we are stronger together. So I appreciate you sharing that, because that is so important. So on that, go ahead, Mr. Swoope.
So when during the COVID, the pandemic, when we saw members of Black Lives Matter, when we saw all these Black beautiful faces out there protesting, right? I was moved by that, because I hadn't seen that in Black people in a long, long time. And I think we have to uphold and uplift our young, because they're the future, and they're gonna need our guidance. We got to stop saying, well, we're like, well, those young kids, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. But then tell them, talk to them. Don't talk at them. Talk to them. The problem is, we talk at them. We don't talk to them. And just like your kids, if you start talking at them, they're going to tune you out. Mm-hmm. But you talk to them, they'll listen. And that's the difference.
Yeah, you're right. And I applaud, and it warms my heart when I see a lot of the younger generation stepping up and speaking out, especially as it relates to what's going on now. But the reality is, like, as we notice, some of the people that are serving in some of these high-ranking positions in the U.S. Senate and Congress, it's time for some of these people to be voted out, and it's time for the up-and-coming generation, and it's just time for someone new to come in. Because I even think about, Schumer. I'm like, you have shown me that you are not about the people. And so people who are ready, people who are in the fight, people who want to see positive change, even if it's people who are younger, because I think about AOC and she's not like, I think she's maybe her 20s, 30s, but she's in that young generation. She has fight in her. And so when I see people like her unapologetic, unafraid to speak her truth because it's for right, that's what we need. So thank you. Go ahead.
So if you look at the opposite of my frat brother, my other frat brother, Hakeem Jeffries.
Oh, okay. I love him.
Yeah, but he sounds like a robot. He sounds like a broken record.
Powerful though.
He sounds like Chuck Schumer.
Mm.
You know, the same messaging. Don't nobody want to hear that. We know that more dollars are going to the millionaires and the billionaires. Well, what I want to know, what are you going to do? That's where I've been disappointed at, is to sit there and listen to him, spew out the same messages that you heard from Schumer and all the other senators and congressmen. I'm saying, dude, we don't want to hear that. I'm your frat, but I'm gonna call you out because you're missing the point here, and that's why people are calling him out. He's feeling aggression because he sounds like a robot.
It's interesting you said that because I think she's a senator. Her name Nina. I can't think of her last name. I saw a post. She was actually on one of Dr. Richie's shows, and she mentioned him, and I stuck a pin in that, and I was like, why is she calling out him? And now that you said that, it challenges me to go and kind of go back and see, like, what has he not been doing? What is he doing? Because, what I've seen from him in the past has always been, just a proponent of making sure that it's for the side of right. But I will say just some things that have been happening in the House. I felt like I needed more fire for from some of these, especially some of these veteran, Democrats. And he is one. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. So
you got to call spade.
Well, well, I know we could go on and on and on, and I know you and I talked about like we might end up having to have a part 2. So we definitely gonna have to come back and talk. So on that note, everyone, I do want to say thank you for those who actually tune in and those who will tune in later, those who will come back and watch. And Mr. Frederick Swoope Sr., thank you so much for saying yes to collaborating with me on this platform. I could not have done this without you. I truly believe in my heart that this conversation was necessary. It was relevant. It was important, especially being able to hear from a Black man living in America. And so I'm so proud that you said yes, because you have so much that you have shared with us. You have a wealth of experience, a wealth of knowledge. And we talked about a variety of topics, but I felt that it was necessary, especially right now in 2025, in the month of April, 90 days after this first few months of this administration serving. We are just in a place in our country where I believe now more than ever, we have got to come together in unity. We have got to really continue to just come together and just keep informing, keep educating, but also start challenging ourselves within our own community to figure out, what can I do? What kind of action can I take to help that, to not help, but to ensure that we are contributing to the solution, but not to the problem. And I'll say for me, as I close out, one of the things that I often share with people when they ask me, why did I pursue my PhD in public policy administration? I said, well, running for political office is not off the table. That's something that I've considered. And it's like now more than ever, it has really still been something that's been weighing on me. And I am so bothered by some things that continue to happen. And of course, I continue to pray and I continue to trust the process, because I continue to say God will not allow these things to happen without ensuring that his people are going to be okay. It's a bigger picture that I can't see. And so I say all that to say that I don't know, but for me, that's something I think about, because I think about where I am right now as a proud Black woman. I'm unapologetic about standing on what's right, speaking the truth, speaking truth to power, and taking action, because I want to see a better future for not just us, but all people. Well, I definitely want to see a better future for us, because I don't want to feel as though I'm living in 2025 going backwards. I don't want to feel that way. I want to continue to move forward. So I want to say thank you again for tuning in. Thank you for all that you do, what you've done. You're amazing. Thank you for just being a servant leader. And I am truly excited about how I believe this segment could really, help our community. Really been informative to me. And I look forward to future collaborations. And again, thank you to those who tuned in. Please tell somebody so they can tell somebody, and they can tell somebody to watch episode 5 of Living in America from the educated Black female perspective, but also living in America from the Black man's perspective. My name is Dr. Marsha, your host. Be blessed and have a great night, everyone.